The Hell's Angel saw a waitress defending her daughter. What he did next surprised everyone. The morning sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting warm patches of light across the worn leather seats. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, as Mick Grizzly Carter ducked his head slightly to enter through the door, his massive frame making the entrance seem smaller than it was. His daughter Lily bounced along beside him, her small hand firmly wrapped in his. The regulars glanced up briefly before returning to their meals. Most had grown used to the sight of the tattooed giant and his little girl, even if they weren't entirely comfortable with his presence. Mick's arms, covered in faded ink that told stories of his past life, contrasted sharply with the gentle way he guided Lily to their usual corner booth. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. "Can I have pancakes today, Daddy?" Lily asked, sliding into her seat and pulling out her favorite stuffed rabbit from her small backpack. Mick's weathered face softened as he looked at his daughter. "Sure thing, Princess. With extra strawberries, just how you like them." His voice was low and gravelly, but held nothing but tenderness when he spoke to her. While they waited for their order, Lily hugged her stuffed rabbit close, making it dance along the edge of the table. "Mr. Whiskers wants to explore the diner," she explained, her eyes bright with imagination. "Just be careful with him," Mick said, his lips twitching into a small smile. He watched as she continued to play, making the rabbit hop from spot to spot. The sight of her happy and carefree made his heart swell. These quiet moments with his daughter were what he lived for now, so different from his turbulent past. "And then Mr. Whiskers jumped over the big mountain of sugar packets," Lily narrated, lost in her own world of make-believe. She stood up slightly in her seat to make the rabbit leap higher. In her enthusiasm, Lily's elbow accidentally knocked against someone passing by their table. The man, dressed in an expensive-looking suit and carrying a briefcase, stumbled slightly, his coffee sloshing in its cup. "Watch what you're doing, you little brat." The man's voice cut through the peaceful morning atmosphere like a knife. His face reddened as he glared down at Lily, who immediately shrunk back into her seat. Mick's muscles tensed, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The familiar surge of protective anger rose in his chest, but years of working to control his temper made him hesitate. He'd promised himself, and Lily, that he wouldn't return to his old ways. I'm sorry," Lily whispered, her lower lip trembling. She clutched Mr. Whiskers tightly to her chest, as if the stuffed rabbit could shield her from the man's anger. But the man wasn't finished. His voice rose even louder, drawing attention from everyone in the diner. "Didn't your parents teach you any manners? Or maybe they're too busy raising a wild child to care about proper behavior." Lily's eyes filled with tears as she looked at her father, confusion and hurt written across her small face. Mick sat frozen, torn between his instinct to protect his daughter and his fear of confirming everyone's worst assumptions about him. His jaw clenched tight enough to hurt, his knuckles white against the table's surface. The man continued his tirade, his voice getting louder with each word. "This is what's wrong with kids today. No respect, no discipline. Someone needs to teach you a lesson about—" The rude man's face grew redder as he continued his verbal assault. "Look at you, sitting there like you own the place," he sneered at Lily, who had tears streaming down her face now. "Bumping into people, making a mess. What kind of child behaves like this in public?" Lily's small shoulders shook as she tried to hold back her sobs. Mr. Whiskers, her beloved stuffed rabbit, was crushed against her chest as if he could protect her from the cruel words. The other diners watched uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others whispering behind raised hands. Mick's breathing grew heavy, his massive frame rigid with tension. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to stand up, to defend his little girl. But years of working to overcome his violent past held him back. He'd promised himself he wouldn't resort to intimidation anymore, wouldn't let his anger control him. Still, watching his daughter cry made his heart ache, and his fists clench beneath the table. "And you?" The man turned his attention to Mick, his lip curling in disgust as he took in the tattoos and scarred knuckles. "I suppose this is what passes for parenting in your world, letting your kid run wild, disturbing decent folk?" "That's enough!" The sharp voice cut through the tension like a thunderclap. Sarah Williams, the waitress, strode forward from behind the counter, her blonde ponytail swinging with each determined step. Her usually warm blue eyes had turned to steel as she planted herself between the man and Lily's table. "You don't talk to a child like that in my diner," Sarah declared, her voice firm and unwavering. She wasn't tall, barely reaching the man's shoulder, but there was a fierce dignity in her stance that made her seem larger than life. The man blinked, clearly caught off guard by this unexpected intervention. "Now see here," he started, but Sarah cut him off. "No, you see here," she said, crossing her arms. "That little girl apologized for an accident. She's done nothing to deserve this kind of treatment. If anyone's disturbing the peace here, it's you." The diner had gone completely silent. Every eye was fixed on the scene unfolding before them. Even the cooks had stopped their work to watch through the service window. The man's mouth opened and closed several times, like a fish out of water. His face, if possible, grew even redder. He glanced around the diner, perhaps looking for support, but found none. Instead, he was met with disapproving stares from the other patrons. Finally, he muttered something unintelligible under his breath, grabbed his briefcase, and stormed toward the exit. The bell above the door jangled angrily as he slammed it behind him. In the sudden quiet that followed, Sarah turned to check on Lily. The little girl's tears had slowed, and she was looking up at Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and awe. Mick, still seated, met Sarah's eyes. His expression was unreadable, but he gave her a slight nod, a gesture that conveyed more thanks than words ever could. The diner slowly returned to its usual rhythm of clinking plates and quiet conversations. Lily dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, while Mick sat in uncomfortable silence, his broad shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. The incident had shaken both of them, though for different reasons. Lily was still processing the man's cruel words, while Mick wrestled with the guilt of not defending his daughter himself. Sarah approached their table, carrying 2 steaming plates. "Here we go," she said softly, setting down Lily's chocolate chip pancakes and Mick's chicken fried steak. "Extra whipped cream for you, sweetie," she added, giving Lily a gentle smile. The little girl's eyes lit up slightly at the sight of the towering white cream on her pancakes. "Thank you," Mick mumbled, his deep voice barely above a whisper. He kept his eyes down, focusing on arranging his silverware with unnecessary precision. "For everything, I mean. What you did just now—" Sarah glanced around the diner, then made a quick decision. She slid into the booth next to Lily, who automatically scooted over to make room. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" she asked, though she was already settled in. "Some people just need to be put in their place," Sarah said matter-of-factly, smoothing her apron. "I couldn't just stand there and let him bully a child like that. It's not right." Mick looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time since the confrontation. He was struck by the warmth and conviction he saw there. This wasn't just empty kindness. Sarah meant every word she said. "Still," he said, clearing his throat. "Most people wouldn't have stepped in. They usually just—" He trailed off, not wanting to finish the thought in front of Lily. "Look the other way?" Sarah finished for him, her voice gentle but firm. Well, I'm not most people. She turned to Lily, who was carefully cutting into her pancakes. You know, I've got 2 kids of my own. My boy Tommy, he's just a little older than you. Lily perked up at this, her fork pausing midway to her mouth. Really? Sarah nodded, her eyes taking on a distant look. Last year, some bigger kids were picking on him at the park. You should have seen me, she chuckled, shaking her head at the memory. I marched right over there, Mama Bear mode activated. Those kids scattered so fast you'd think they'd seen a ghost. Lily giggled, and even Mick couldn't help but smile. The image of Sarah, who barely reached his shoulder, scaring off a group of bullies, was both amusing and impressive. Sometimes, Sarah continued, her voice softer now, people think they can get away with being mean just because they're bigger, or think they're more important. But that doesn't make it right. She gave Lily's hand a quick pat. And it's okay to stand up to them, even if it's scary. Mick watched Sarah as she spoke, noticing things he hadn't before. The quiet strength in her posture, the gentle way she addressed Lily, the wisdom in her words. She wasn't just the friendly waitress who served them breakfast twice a week. She was a mother who understood the fierce need to protect children, someone who had faced her own battles and emerged stronger. Thank you, he said again, but this time his voice was steadier, more certain. Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a moment of mutual understanding, of recognition. The next few days brought a gentle rhythm to the diner visits. Each morning, as Mick and Lily walked through the door, the bell's cheerful jingle announced their arrival. Sarah would look up from behind the counter, her smile growing warmer with each passing day. "Good morning, you two," she called out on a particularly sunny Tuesday. Lily skipped ahead to their usual booth, while Mick followed, his heavy boots making familiar sounds against the worn linoleum floor. "The usual?" Sarah asked, already pulling out her notepad. Her blonde hair was tied back in a neat ponytail, and she had a streak of flour on her cheek from helping in the kitchen. Mick nodded, then surprised himself by adding, "Unless you've got something special today?" "Well," Sarah's eyes brightened. "Cook just pulled a fresh berry cobbler out of the oven. It's not on the menu yet, but—" She winked at Lily, whose face lit up at the mention of dessert. As the days went by, their conversations evolved from simple food orders to gentle small talk. Sarah would share funny stories about the morning rush, and Lily would tell her about school. Mick mostly listened, but his silence became more comfortable, less guarded. On Thursday, Lily brought her art project to show Sarah. It was a crayon drawing of a rainbow-colored butterfly, and Sarah praised it with genuine enthusiasm. "This is beautiful. You've got quite the talent there, sweetie." Mick watched their interaction, noticing how Sarah always seemed to know exactly what to say to make Lily beam with pride. It was a gift, he thought, to make people feel so at ease. Friday afternoon found them lingering over the remains of their lunch. The diner was quiet, with only a couple of regulars nursing their coffee at the counter. Sarah had just finished clearing their plates when Mick cleared his throat. "So," he began, his voice rough but gentle. "You've been here long? At the diner, I mean?" Sarah paused, balancing their empty plates on one arm. "Going on 5 years now?" she replied, then added with a small laugh. "Feels like forever sometimes." "Must be tough," Mick ventured, "working these long hours." Sarah's smile flickered slightly, but didn't fade. She glanced around the nearly empty diner, then pulled up a chair to their table. "It can be," she admitted, setting the plates aside. "Especially with 2 kids at home." "You have children?" Lily perked up, her eyes wide with interest. Sarah nodded, her expression softening. "Tommy's 10, and Emma's 7. She hesitated for a moment before continuing. It's just the three of us now since the divorce. Been about a year? Mick's expression remained neutral, but his eyes showed understanding. He knew something about starting over, about rebuilding a life from scattered pieces. Is Tommy in 4th grade? Lily asked, scooting closer to the edge of her seat. That's where I'm going next year. He is, Sarah smiled, though there was a hint of something bittersweet in her eyes. It's not always easy, juggling everything on my own, but we make it work. She straightened her apron, a gesture that seemed more habitual than necessary. The kids are worth every minute of it. As Sarah walked away to tend to other customers, Mick's gaze lingered on her retreating form. Her words about juggling life as a single parent struck a chord deep within him. His weathered hands wrapped around his coffee mug, seeking its warmth as memories washed over him like a cold tide. The weight of his past pressed down on his broad shoulders. 10 years ago, he'd been a different man entirely. Angry, reckless, running with the wrong crowd. The leather jacket he'd worn then had felt like armor, the Hells Angels patch his badge of belonging. But that life had cost him dearly. He glanced at Lily, who was busy drawing on her placemat with the crayons Sarah had brought her. His daughter's innocent concentration, the way her tongue stuck out slightly as she colored, made his heart ache. How many of her first steps had he missed? How many bedtime stories had gone unread while he sat in a cold cell? "Daddy, look!" Lily held up her drawing, a house with a smiling sun above it. "That's our home." Mick forced a smile, but the guilt gnawed at him. Their home was a modest 2-bedroom apartment above Joe's auto shop, where he now worked as a mechanic. It was honest work, but a far cry from what he'd once promised himself he'd provide for his family. The memories kept coming, uninvited but persistent. The night of his arrest, the look of disappointment in his mother's eyes, the years of visits through thick glass panels. He remembered the promise he'd made to himself in that cell. To be better, to deserve the second chance he'd been given. His fingers absently traced one of his tattoos, a faded skull on his forearm. Each mark on his skin told a story he wished he could erase, especially when he caught people staring, judging, assuming they knew everything about him from these inked reminders of his past. The bell above the diner door chimed, and he instinctively tensed. Old habits died hard. But it was just an elderly couple walking in, regulars he'd seen before. Still, their quick, nervous glances in his direction didn't escape his notice. Would he ever stop being that ex-con to people? Lily's small hand reached across the table, covering his large, calloused one. "Are you sad, Daddy?" Before he could answer, Sarah appeared at their table again. She must have noticed his changed demeanor, because her usual bright smile softened into something more understanding. She slid into the booth across from him, next to Lily. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think starting over meant erasing everything that came before." She smoothed her apron with careful hands. "But now I think it's more about learning to carry our past differently." Mick looked up, meeting her gentle gaze. There was no judgment there, no fear or hesitation, just warmth and something that looked remarkably like acceptance. "Sometimes I wonder if it's too late," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "If some mistakes are too big to come back from?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "It's never too late to change your story, Mick. Never." She glanced at Lily, who was watching them both intently. "Every day we get up and try again is another chance to get it right." The simple truth in her words settled over him like a comfortable blanket. For the first time in years, Mick felt the tight knot of guilt in his chest loosen just a little. In Sarah's kind eyes and gentle smile, he saw something he hadn't dared hope for in a long time: understanding. The afternoon sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. Mick sat at his usual booth, absently stirring his coffee while Lily worked on her math homework beside him. His eyes followed Sarah as she moved efficiently between tables, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail that swung with each step. The diner was packed today. The lunch rush had brought in a crowd of factory workers from the plant down the road, along with the usual mix of locals. Sarah darted between tables, balancing plates with practiced ease, her smile never wavering despite the chaos. "Order up," called Pete from the kitchen window, and Sarah spun on her heel, somehow managing to grab 3 plates at once. Mick noticed how she remembered every customer's special requests. No onions here, extra sauce there, without missing a beat. "She's like a superhero," Lily whispered, also watching Sarah work. "But instead of fighting bad guys, she fights hungry people." Mick chuckled softly. "Something like that, kiddo." He watched as Sarah handled a complaint about cold soup with patience and grace, quickly getting the customer a fresh bowl with an apologetic smile. The afternoon wore on, and Mick found himself impressed by Sarah's stamina. She never seemed to slow down, moving from task to task with determination. When a young boy accidentally spilled his milkshake, she was there in seconds with a mop, and kind words that turned his tears into giggles. "Need help with that problem?" Sarah asked as she passed their booth, noticing Lily's furrowed brow over her homework. She paused just long enough to point out where Lily had made a small mistake in her multiplication, explaining it in a way that made perfect sense. Finally, the crowd began to thin out. The sun was lower in the sky now, casting an orange glow through the windows. Sarah emerged from the back, her apron gone, looking tired but satisfied after her shift. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" she asked, sliding into the booth across from them before Mick could answer. She let out a long breath, rolling her shoulders to release the tension. "You work hard," Mick said simply, pushing his fresh cup of coffee toward her. Sarah accepted it gratefully. "Someone's got to keep this place running," she said with a small laugh. "Besides, busy days make the time go faster." "We're going to the park," Lily announced suddenly, bouncing in her seat. "Daddy promised we could go after my homework was done." Mick cleared his throat, gathering his courage. "You could join us," he offered, his voice gruff but gentle. "If you're not too tired, that is. Might be nice to walk off all that running around." Sarah hesitated, her fingers playing with the coffee cup. Mick could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the quick mental calculation of whether this was crossing some invisible line. "Please," Lily added, her eyes bright with hope. "You can help me name all the ducks at the pond." A smile tugged at Sarah's lips. "Well, when you put it that way." She looked at Mick, something soft in her expression. "Sure, why not? I could use some fresh air." They gathered their things, Lily stuffing her homework into her backpack, Mick leaving a generous tip on the table. As they headed toward the door, Lily skipped ahead, already chattering about the family of ducks she'd seen at the park yesterday. Sarah fell into step beside Mick, a comfortable silence between them. The evening air was cool and sweet, carrying the promise of spring. As they walked, Lily's laughter rang out, clear and bright, and Sarah joined in, the sound of their shared joy making Mick's heart feel lighter than it had in years. The following week brought a gentle shift in the rhythm of Mick's days. His morning visits to the diner became longer, stretching well past Lily's finished breakfast as he nursed his coffee and watched Sarah work. Sometimes, when the diner was quiet, she'd slide into their booth for a few minutes, sharing stories about her kids or listening to Lily's excited chatter about school. Even on his busiest days at the auto shop, Mick found himself thinking about Sarah's warm smile and the way she always seemed to know exactly what to say to make Lily's face light up. He noticed little things now, How she always remembered to bring extra napkins for Lily's messy pancakes, or the way she hummed quietly to herself while refilling coffee cups. One evening, as the setting sun painted the diner windows in shades of orange and pink, Mick sat at the counter while Lily worked on her spelling homework. Sarah moved back and forth behind the counter, wiping down surfaces and restocking supplies for the next day. "Tommy's got a baseball game tomorrow," she mentioned, straightening a stack of menus. "He's nervous about pitching." Mick nodded, remembering how Sarah had talked about her son's love for baseball. "First game's always tough," he said, his voice gentle. "But once he's on that mound, he'll forget all about being scared." Sarah smiled, but Mick noticed the slight worry in her eyes. "I hope so. I just wish—" She trailed off, shaking her head as she reached up to adjust a flickering light fixture above the counter. The bulb buzzed and flickered again, making her sigh. Everything seems to need fixing these days. The house, the car, even this place. Mick watched as she stretched to reach the fixture, her frustration evident. He recognized that look, the one that said she was carrying too much on her own shoulders. He'd seen it in the mirror plenty of times. "I could help," he offered, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. "With fixing things, I mean. Been working on cars and bikes most of my life. Houses aren't much different when it comes down to it." Sarah paused, dish towel in hand, looking at him with surprise. "Oh, I couldn't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm offering." Mick's voice was firm, but kind. "Let me help, Sarah. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for Lily and me." She hesitated, and Mick could see the internal struggle playing across her face. Pride warring with practicality, uncertainty with trust. Finally, her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Well," she said slowly, "there is this leaky faucet in the kitchen that's been driving me crazy, and the back porch step is loose." "Just tell me when," Mick replied, feeling a warmth in his chest at her acceptance. Sarah looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing past the tattoos and the gruff exterior for the first time. Her eyes softened, and a small smile tugged at her lips. "Thank you, Mick," she said quietly. "That means a lot." The moment stretched between them, filled with understanding and something else. Something neither of them was quite ready to name. It was Lily who broke the silence, proudly holding up her completed homework for inspection. But the connection lingered in the air like the last rays of sunlight through the diner windows. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when the whispers began. At the grocery store, elderly Mrs. Peterson clutched her shopping basket tighter as she shared stories with the checkout clerk about Mick's supposed criminal past. Outside the post office, two women huddled together, their voices dropping to hushed tones as they discussed his tattoos and what they might mean. "Did you hear?" one woman whispered to another at the pharmacy. "Sarah Williams has been spending time with that biker fellow, the one with all those terrible tattoos." "The Hell's Angel," her friend replied, eyebrows raised. "I heard he did time in prison, armed robbery, they say." The rumors spread through the small town like wildfire, growing more elaborate with each retelling. Some claimed Mick had been involved in drug trafficking, while others swore they'd heard about violent altercations during his time with the motorcycle gang. Few bothered to verify these stories. The truth seemed less important than the thrill of gossip. Sarah noticed the change in how people looked at her when she walked down Main Street. The friendly waves became shorter, the smiles a bit more forced. Even some of her regular customers at the diner started requesting different sections, though they tried to be subtle about it. One particularly busy afternoon, as Sarah balanced plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, she caught snippets of conversation from a nearby booth. "Can't believe she lets her kids anywhere near him," a woman muttered, not quite quietly enough. "Once a criminal, always a criminal." Sarah's hands tightened on her serving tray, but she kept her composure, remembering the gentle way Mick helped Lily with her homework, and how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, a rare sight that was becoming more frequent lately. It was during her afternoon break when Julie Davis, her best friend since high school, appeared at the diner's back door. Julie's face was pinched with concern, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by something more serious. "Sarah, we need to talk," Julie said, pulling her friend outside into the alley behind the diner. The spring air was cool, carrying the scent of newly bloomed flowers from the nearby park. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, though she had a feeling she knew what was coming. Julie crossed her arms, her expression troubled. "It's about Mick Carter. People are talking, Sarah. They're saying you've been spending a lot of time with him." "He's a customer, Julie, and he's been nothing but kind." "He's a former Hell's Angel," Julie interrupted, her voice sharp with worry. "Do you even know what that means? What those people do? I looked it up, Sarah. The crimes, the violence." "That was his past," Sarah defended, though she felt a small knot forming in her stomach. "Was it?" Julie's eyes softened with concern. "How well do you really know him? Have you asked about his time in prison? About what he did to end up there? Think about your kids, Sarah. What if—" "Stop." Sarah held up her hand, her voice firm despite the uncertainty creeping into her thoughts. "Mick is trying to build a better life for his daughter. I've seen how hard he works at it." Julie shook her head, reaching out to touch Sarah's arm. "I'm just worried about you. You always want to see the best in people, but sometimes people don't change. Just promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll think about what I've said." Sarah nodded, more to end the conversation than in agreement. But as she watched her friend walk away, she couldn't help but feel the first seeds of doubt taking root in her mind. The image of Mick's gentle smile when he looked at Lily seemed to blur slightly, overlaid with the whispered stories of his darker past. Sarah stood at her kitchen counter that evening, mechanically stirring sugar into her tea as her mind wandered. Julie's words from earlier echoed in her thoughts, mixing with the whispered conversations she'd overheard around town. The spoon clinked against the ceramic cup, a steady rhythm that matched her racing heart. Her son's homework lay scattered across the kitchen table, math problems half finished. "Mom," Tommy called from the living room, "can I go to Jake's house tomorrow after school?" The question made her pause. Jake's mother had always been friendly, but today at the grocery store she'd barely managed a hello. Was it because of Mick? Sarah's stomach tightened. "I'll think about it, honey," she called back, her voice steady despite her unease. She walked to the window, watching as the streetlights flickered on one by one. A few months ago, everything had seemed simpler. She was just a waitress, a single mom trying her best. Now, people looked at her differently. The whispers followed her everywhere. "He seems nice enough now," Mrs. Anderson had said at the pharmacy yesterday. "But you know what they say about leopards and their spots." Sarah pulled out her phone, opening the browser. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing, "Hell's Angels Criminal Activities." The results made her throat tight. Articles about violence, drug trafficking, and organized crime filled the screen. She quickly closed the tab, but the words stayed with her. That night, as she tucked her daughter Jenny into bed, the little girl asked, "Mom, is Mr. Carter a bad man? Katie at school said her mom told her to stay away from him." Sarah's heart sank. "Sweetie, it's not nice to listen to gossip," she said, but doubt crept into her voice. The next morning at the diner, Sarah moved through her tasks like a sleepwalker. Her usual warmth felt forced. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She kept thinking about her children, about the town's judgment, about the life she'd worked so hard to rebuild after her divorce. The bell above the door chimed. Sarah's heart jumped as Mick walked in with Lily, heading to their usual booth. Lily waved enthusiastically, but Sarah could only manage a weak smile in return. "Morning," Mick said as she approached their table. His voice was gentle, just like always, but now Sarah found herself wondering about the stories behind each of his tattoos, about the years he'd spent behind bars. "Coffee?" she asked, not meeting his eyes. Her hand trembled slightly as she poured. "Sarah," Mick said, his tone concerned, "is everything okay?" She busied herself with straightening the sugar packets. "Fine," she replied, too quickly. "Just tired. Busy morning?" "You sure? You seem—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Different today?" "Really, it's nothing," Sarah said, taking a step back from the table. "I should check on my other tables. I'll bring your usual orders in a few minutes." She could feel Mick's confused gaze following her as she walked away, could sense the hurt in his silence. Lily's small voice carried across the diner. "Daddy, why is Miss Sarah acting weird?" Sarah's chest tightened as she retreated to the kitchen, pretending not to hear. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes, torn between what her heart told her about Mick and what everyone else seemed so certain about. Sarah sat across from Tom at their usual meeting spot in the park, watching their children play on the swings. The autumn breeze carried fallen leaves across the playground, and Sarah pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "I heard you've been spending time with that ex-con," Tom said, his voice sharp with disapproval. "The Hell's Angel? Really, Sarah?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "His name is Mick, and he's not like that anymore. People like that don't change." Tom turned to face her, his expression stern. "Have you lost your mind? What about our kids? Did you even think about them?" "Of course I think about our kids," Sarah snapped, her voice trembling. "That's all I ever think about." "Then why are you hanging around with someone like him? Do you know what those gangs do? The violence? The drugs?" Tom pulled out his phone, scrolling through something before shoving it in her face. "Look at this. 3 years ago, his gang was involved in a major drug bust. Is this the kind of person you want around Tommy and Jenny?" Sarah pushed the phone away, her stomach churning. "That was his past. He's different now." "Different?" Tom laughed bitterly. "Wake up, Sarah. Men like that don't change. They just get better at hiding who they really are. What happens when his old buddies show up? When they want favors? Are you ready to put our children in that kind of danger?" Sarah watched Jenny swing higher, her daughter's laughter carrying across the playground. The sound, usually so joyful, now filled her with worry. "I'm not trying to hurt you," Tom said, his voice softening slightly. "But someone needs to knock some sense into you. You're being naive." The words stung, mostly because they echoed her own growing doubts. Sarah stood up abruptly. "I need to get to work." Later that evening, the diner was nearly empty when Mick walked in. Sarah's heart raced as she watched him approach the counter. She'd been rehearsing this conversation all afternoon, but now that he was here, her carefully planned words felt inadequate. "Can we talk?" she asked, leading him to a quiet corner booth. Mick's expression was guarded as he sat down. "About why you've been avoiding me." Sarah twisted her hands in her lap. "People are talking, Mick, about your past, about us spending time together." "And you believe what they're saying?" His voice was quiet, but she could hear the hurt in it. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Sarah's voice cracked. "I have to think about my kids. If something happened, if your old gang—" "I would never let anything happen to you or your children," Mick interrupted, his eyes intense. "That's not who I am anymore." "But it is who you were," Sarah countered, feeling tears well up. I can't just ignore that. The things you did. You think I don't know? Mick's voice rose slightly before he caught himself. You think I don't wake up every day trying to make up for my mistakes? I'm not asking you to trust me blindly, Mick said, his voice softening. But I promise you, Sarah, I will prove that I'm not that man anymore. Just don't give up on me yet. The bell above the diner's door chimed, and Mick's heart stopped. There, standing in the doorway, with her familiar auburn hair and their mother's green eyes, was Karen. His sister looked exactly as he remembered her, though time had etched a few more worry lines around her eyes. Lily looked up from her coloring book. Daddy, who's that lady? Mick's throat tightened. That's your Aunt Karen, sweetheart. Karen stood frozen, her purse clutched tightly against her chest. Her eyes darted between Mick and Lily, uncertainty written across her face. After what felt like an eternity, she took small, hesitant steps toward their booth. Hello, Mick, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's been a while, Mick replied, his large hands fidgeting with a paper napkin. Almost 8 years. Karen nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mom's birthday is next week. I thought maybe I should stop by. Would you like to sit? Mick gestured to the empty seat across from him and Lily. Karen hesitated before sliding into the booth. Her eyes kept returning to Lily, who was watching her with curiosity. She looks just like Jessica, Karen said softly, referring to Lily's mother. Yeah, she does. Mick swallowed hard. Lily, why don't you go ask Sarah for some hot chocolate? Once Lily was out of earshot, Karen's carefully maintained composure cracked. I heard you were trying to turn things around, but I didn't believe it. After everything that happened... I know, Mick interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. I know what I did to this family. To you. Do you? Karen's eyes flashed. Do you know what it was like explaining to people why my brother was in prison? Why Mom cried herself to sleep every night? Why Dad... She stopped, choking back tears. Mick's shoulders slumped. I think about Dad every day, about how disappointed he was in me, about how he died before I could make things right. You chose them over us, Karen said, her voice bitter. The gang became your family. You threw us away like we meant nothing. I was lost, Mick admitted, staring down at his tattooed hands. I was angry and stupid, and I thought I needed to prove something to the world. By the time I realized what I'd done, how many people I'd hurt. He shook his head. I can't change the past, Karen, but I'm trying to be better. For Lily, for myself. And what happens when you fail? Karen asked, her voice trembling. What happens when you slip back into old habits? More broken hearts? More disappointed family members? That won't happen, Mick said firmly. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. But I need you to know that I'm not that person anymore. Karen wiped away a tear. I want to believe you, Mick. But every time I look at you, I see that angry young man who chose a gang over his family, who missed Mom's cancer surgery because he was running drugs across state lines, who wasn't there when Dad had his heart attack. The weight of her words pressed down on Mick's chest like a physical thing. I carry that guilt every day, he whispered, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it. Karen stood up, her movements jerky and uncertain. I can see you're trying, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But I'm not ready. Maybe I'll never be ready. She glanced over at Lily, who was chatting with Sarah at the counter. Take care of her, Mick. Don't let her down like you did us. Before Mick could respond, Karen turned and hurried out of the diner, leaving him alone with the ghosts of his past mistakes. Mick sat in his truck outside the diner long after Karen had left, his large hands gripping the steering wheel. Lily was at school, and he'd taken the morning off from work, needing time to think. The morning sun filtered through the windshield, warming his face, but he felt cold inside. His sister's words echoed in his mind. What happens when you fail? The old Mick would have gotten angry, would have lashed out. Instead, he felt a deep sadness, mixed with something else, determination. He pulled out his wallet and removed a worn photograph. It showed a younger version of himself, surrounded by men in leather jackets, their faces hard and defiant. The edges were creased from years of folding and unfolding. This was who he used to be, the man Karen couldn't forgive, the man who had disappointed his parents, the man who had chosen a gang over his family. But when he thought about Lily's smile, about Sarah's kindness, about the way they both looked at him with trust rather than fear, he knew he couldn't go back to being that man. Maybe Karen would never forgive him. Maybe some people in town would always see him as Grizzly, the ex-con. But he wasn't living for their approval anymore. He started his truck and drove to Sarah's house. She had asked him to look at her broken porch steps last week, and he had promised to fix them. It was a small thing, but it felt important, keeping his word, helping someone who had shown him kindness. The old wood of Sarah's porch creaked under his weight as he examined the damage. The steps needed more than just a quick fix. Several boards were rotting, and the railings were loose. He went to work, carefully removing the damaged pieces, measuring twice before cutting the new lumber. As he worked, he thought about his father, who had taught him carpentry before things went wrong. His dad would have appreciated the care he was taking now, making sure everything was level, every nail straight. It was the kind of work that required patience and attention to detail, qualities the old Mick had never possessed. Sarah came out mid-morning with a glass of lemonade. She watched him work for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "You're good at this," she said, handing him the drink. Mick wiped his forehead with his sleeve before taking the glass. "My dad was a carpenter. He tried to teach me, but I was too busy being angry at the world to learn properly." Sarah sat on the top step, careful to avoid his tools. "What made you change?" Mick was quiet for a moment, running his hand over the smooth surface of a new board. "Lily," he said finally. "And people like you, who saw something in me worth saving." He paused, then added, "My sister came by the diner yesterday." "I saw her," Sarah said softly. "It didn't look like it went well." "She can't forgive me. Maybe she never will." Mick picked up his hammer again, aligning a nail. "But I realized something. I can't change what people think of me. All I can do is try to be better today than I was yesterday." Sarah watched as he worked, noting the gentle way he handled the wood, how he took extra care to make sure everything was secure. This wasn't the work of someone trying to prove something to others. This was someone rebuilding himself, one careful step at a time. "I believe you," she said quietly. "I believe in who you're becoming." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't just about fixing a broken porch anymore. It was about trust, about seeing someone for who they truly were, about believing in the possibility of change. Sarah watched from her seat as Mick quietly entered the community center, his large frame making him impossible to miss. He'd traded his usual work clothes for a clean button-down shirt and pressed jeans, an effort to look presentable that made her heart ache. The monthly town meeting was about to start, and the room was already buzzing with whispered conversations. Lily's school playground needed repairs, and Mick had volunteered his carpentry skills to help. That's why he was here tonight, to discuss his offer with the town council. But as soon as he stepped through the door, the atmosphere changed. People shifted in their seats, some turning away, others glaring openly. Mayor Thompson, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, I'm afraid we need to have a word before the meeting begins." Mick nodded and followed the mayor to a corner of the room. Sarah couldn't hear what was being said. but she could read the body language, the mayor's stiff posture, Mick's slowly dropping shoulders. When the mayor's voice rose slightly, a few words carried across the room. "Considering your history with the angels?" The rest of the room had gone quiet, everyone straining to listen. Sarah's hands clenched in her lap as she watched Mick's face. He remained calm, but she could see the hurt in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened. "I understand your concerns," Mick said, his voice low and controlled. "But I'm just here to help with the playground. My daughter goes to that school." Mrs. Peterson, head of the PTA, stood up. "Mayor Thompson, I think we all agree that someone with Mr. Carter's background shouldn't be anywhere near our children's playground." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sarah saw Mick's hands curl into fists, then slowly relax, a conscious effort to stay calm. "I've served my time," Mick said quietly. "I'm not that person anymore." "Once a Hell's Angel, always a Hell's Angel," someone called from the back of the room. The mayor adjusted his glasses. "Perhaps it would be best if you left, Mr. Carter. We can discuss the playground another time." Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She pushed her chair back and stood up, her heart pounding. "This isn't right," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "You're all sitting here judging a man who's trying to do something good for our children." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, including Mick's. She saw surprise and gratitude in his expression, giving her courage to continue. "I see Mick Carter every day at my diner. I see how he treats people with respect, how he's raising his daughter to be kind and honest. I see a man who works hard and keeps his word." She looked around the room, meeting the stares of her neighbors. "If we claim to be a community that believes in second chances, then we need to actually give them." Mrs. Peterson scoffed. "Sarah, dear, you're being naive. People like him don't change." "People like him?" Sarah's voice grew stronger. "You mean people who admit their mistakes? People who work every day to be better? Because that's who Mick is now." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others continued to glare. Mick stood very still, his expression unreadable, but Sarah could see the emotion in his eyes. Mayor Thompson cleared his throat again. "While we appreciate your perspective, Sarah, the council has concerns about liability and public safety. Mr. Carter, we'll have to decline your offer to help with the playground." The afternoon sun was setting when Lily burst through the diner's back door, her backpack dragging behind her. Sarah, who was finishing her shift, immediately noticed the girl's red-rimmed eyes and trembling lip. Mick, who had come to pick up his daughter from the school bus stop, followed close behind, his face etched with worry. "Baby, please talk to me," Mick said softly, his large frame crouching down to Lily's level. But Lily just shook her head and crawled into their usual booth, pulling her knees up to her chest. Sarah glanced around the nearly empty diner and untied her apron. She slid into the booth next to Lily, while Mick sat across from them, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "Sweetheart," Sarah tried, her voice gentle. "Did something happen at school today?" Lily's shoulders shook as she tried to hold back tears. "Tommy Miller told everyone about Daddy," she whispered, her voice cracking. He said his mom told him that Daddy's a criminal and that he shouldn't play with me because I'm a criminal's daughter." Mick's face went pale, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the table. Sarah could see the pain etched across his features, the guilt that threatened to overwhelm him. "And then," Lily continued, the words tumbling out now, "during recess, nobody would let me play with them. Jenny said her mom said I'm dangerous, just like—" She looked at her father, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Just like you used to be." The diner seemed to grow smaller, the weight of Lily's words pressing in on them. Mick reached across the table, his hand trembling slightly as he tried to touch his daughter's arm, but Lily pulled away. "Is it true, Daddy?" she asked, her voice small and broken. "Are you really as bad as they say? Is that why people at the town meeting didn't want you to help fix the playground?" Sarah watched as Mick struggled to find the right words, his tough exterior crumbling in the face of his daughter's pain. His eyes met Sarah's, pleading for help. "Lily," Sarah said, putting her arm around the girl's shoulders. "Let me tell you something about your daddy." She felt Lily lean into her slightly. "Your father made some mistakes in his past, that's true. But you know what makes him special? He admitted those mistakes, and he's working every single day to be a better person." Lily sniffled, looking up at Sarah with wet eyes. "But the other kids?" "The other kids are just repeating what they hear at home," Sarah continued firmly. "But they don't see what I see. They don't see how your daddy comes in here every morning to make sure you have a good breakfast before school. They don't see how hard he works to give you a good life. They don't see how gentle he is, or how much he loves you." Mick's eyes glistened as he watched Sarah comfort his daughter. Lily uncurled slightly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "You don't have to be ashamed of who your father is," Sarah said, squeezing Lily's shoulder. "Because the man I know, the man sitting right here, is someone to be proud of. He's brave enough to face his past and strong enough to change. That's not something everyone can do." Lily looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw the love and pain in his eyes. Slowly, she reached across the table and put her small hand in his large one. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered. Mick's voice was rough with emotion as he replied, "I love you too, baby girl, more than anything." Sarah wiped down the counter at the diner, her movements slow and deliberate as she watched Mick and Lily through the window. They were sitting on a bench outside, sharing an ice cream cone despite the cool autumn air. The sight made her smile, but her heart ached knowing what they were going through. Just yesterday, she'd overheard 2 regular customers whispering about Mick. "Once a criminal, always a criminal," one had said, and that poor waitress getting mixed up with him. She should know better. The bell above the door chimed, and Julie, Sarah's best friend, walked in. Her face was tight with concern. "Sarah, we need to talk." Sarah sighed, already knowing what was coming. "If this is about Mick again—" "The PTA meeting was awful," Julie cut in, sliding onto a stool. "Half the mothers are threatening to pull their kids from school activities if he volunteers for the fall festival. They're saying it's not safe." Sarah's hands clenched around her cleaning cloth. "Not safe? He's helped fix 3 broken swings and repainted the entire playground equipment, for free." "I know, but—" "No," Sarah said firmly. "I'm tired of the buts. I've watched that man work harder than anyone to prove himself. He's not who they think he is." Julie's expression softened. "Sarah, I understand you want to see the good in him, but what about your own kids? Tom's already threatening to use this against you in court." Sarah felt her stomach twist at the mention of her ex-husband. Tom had been calling more frequently, his voice dripping with judgment every time he brought up Mick. But watching Lily's face light up when she talked about her father, seeing Mick's gentle patience as he taught Sarah's son how to fix his bike, those moments told her more about his character than any rumor could. "My kids are fine," Sarah said. "They see what I see, a man who's trying his best to be better." Through the window, she watched as Mick carefully wiped ice cream from Lily's chin with a napkin. His tattooed hands, which so many people feared, were gentle and loving with his daughter. "I'm not abandoning them, Julie," Sarah continued, her voice quiet but firm. "You didn't see Lily's face yesterday when those kids bullied her. You haven't seen how hard Mick works to give her a good life. They need someone in their corner." Julie stood up, her expression a mix of concern and resignation. I hope you know what you're doing, Sarah. After Julie left, Sarah walked outside to where Mick and Lily sat. Lily's face brightened when she saw her. Sarah, want some ice cream? No thanks, sweetie, Sarah smiled, sitting down next to them. She could feel Mick's eyes on her, full of unspoken gratitude. Everything okay? He asked quietly, noticing her thoughtful expression. Sarah watched as Lily skipped over to pet a neighbor's dog, her pigtails bouncing in the sunlight. Yeah, she said, meaning it. Everything's okay. Mick's shoulder brushed against hers, warm and solid. You don't have to keep defending us, you know. I understand if it's too much. Sarah turned to look at him, taking in the worry lines around his eyes, the way he held himself like he was always prepared for rejection. I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly. Some people might not understand, but I know who you are now. That's what matters. The tension in Mick's shoulders eased slightly, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching Lily play in the fading afternoon light. The neon signs of Murphy's bar cast a harsh glow on Mick's face as he stood outside, taking deep breaths to steady himself. Through the window, he could see Tom Peterson sitting at the bar, the man who'd been spreading vicious rumors about him around town. His hands were trembling slightly, but not from fear. It was the old anger trying to surface. Sarah's words from earlier that day echoed in his mind. Show them who you really are now, not who you used to be. Mick pushed open the heavy wooden door, and the familiar smell of stale beer and cigarettes hit him. A few regulars glanced his way, their conversations dying down as he walked in. He hadn't stepped foot in a bar since getting out of prison, and the atmosphere brought back memories he'd rather forget. Tom sat nursing a beer, his suit jacket draped over the stool next to him. He tensed when he spotted Mick's reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Peterson, Mick said quietly, his voice carrying despite the country music playing from the jukebox. We need to talk. Tom turned slowly, trying to mask his nervousness with a sneer. What's there to talk about, Carter? Everyone knows what you are. The bartender, an older man named Dave, moved closer, ready to intervene. Mick caught his eye and gave a slight shake of his head. He wasn't here for trouble. Actually, Mick said, keeping his voice level, you don't know me at all. And the stories you're spreading? They're hurting my daughter. Tom's expression flickered at the mention of Lily. Maybe you should have thought about that before... Before what? Mick interrupted, still calm but firm. Before I served my time? Before I spent every day for the past 8 years trying to be a better man? He pulled out the stool next to Tom and sat down, noticing how the other man instinctively leaned away. Look, Mick continued, I know what I was. I'm not proud of it. But that man, he's gone. The only thing I care about now is giving my daughter a good life. He paused, letting his words sink in. And yeah, maybe I don't deserve a second chance. But Lily? She deserves everything. And right now your words are making her life harder than it needs to be. The bar had gone completely quiet. Tom stared into his beer, his shoulders tense. You can't just expect people to forget. I don't, Mick said. I'm not asking anyone to forget. I'm asking you to see who I am now. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a crayon drawing Lily had made of herself and him. This is who I am. A father. Nothing more, nothing less. Tom looked at the drawing, then back at Mick. The hostility in his eyes wavered. He started, then cleared his throat. I didn't know about your kid getting bullied. No, Mick agreed quietly. You didn't know a lot of things, but now you do. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Tom nodded slowly. I'll stop spreading the stories, he said, his voice gruff but sincere. Mick stood up, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He'd faced his past without letting it control him, without resorting to the violence that had once been his answer to everything. As he walked out of Murphy's bar, he could feel the eyes of everyone following him. But for once, he didn't mind. He'd shown them something they didn't expect. Not the ex-con they feared, but a father who chose peace over anger. The autumn fair transformed Main Street into a wonderland of twinkling lights and colorful banners. The scent of cotton candy and caramel apples drifted through the crisp evening air. Lily bounced with excitement, her small hand clutching Mick's as they walked past the game booths and food stands. "Can we try the ring toss, Daddy? Please?" Lily tugged at his sleeve, pointing to a booth decorated with stuffed animals. Mick felt the familiar weight of stares from the townspeople. Parents pulled their children closer as he passed, and conversations hushed to whispers. But Sarah's presence beside him helped steady his nerves. She wore a red sweater that matched the fall leaves, and her warm smile hadn't wavered once since they arrived. "Of course, sweetheart," Mick said, leading Lily to the booth. The vendor's eyes widened slightly at Mick's approach, but he handed over the rings without comment. Lily's first few throws missed, but she squealed with delight when her final ring caught the neck of a bottle. The vendor handed her a small teddy bear, which she hugged tightly to her chest. "Look, Sarah, I did it!" Lily beamed, showing off her prize. Sarah knelt down to admire the bear. "That's wonderful, honey. You've got quite an arm there." More people gathered for the evening's main event, the town's annual harvest ceremony. Mayor Thompson stood on the makeshift stage, preparing to give his usual speech. Mick noticed Karen, his sister, standing near the back of the crowd. She'd been keeping her distance since their confrontation, but tonight she met his eyes, and gave a slight nod. The moment felt right. Mick squeezed Sarah's hand and whispered, "I need to do this." Sarah's eyes widened with understanding. "Are you sure?" He nodded, then made his way towards the stage. As he approached Mayor Thompson, the crowd's chatter died down to a tense silence. The mayor paused mid-sentence, surprise evident on his face. "Mr. Thompson," Mick said, his voice carrying across the square, "would you mind if I said a few words?" The mayor hesitated, then stepped aside, giving Mick access to the microphone. Mick cleared his throat, his eyes finding Lily in the crowd. She stood with Sarah, both watching him with encouraging smiles. The sight gave him strength. "Most of you know who I am," he began, his deep voice steady despite his racing heart. "Or at least you think you do. You know about my past with the Hells Angels, about my time in prison." He paused, letting the words settle. "And I won't deny any of it. Those mistakes are part of who I was." The crowd remained silent, but he could feel their attention intensify. "But that's not who I am anymore. For the past 8 years I've been trying to be someone else, someone better, someone my daughter can be proud of." His voice softened as he looked at Lily. "Every day I wake up and choose to be different than I was before. It's not easy, and I know I don't deserve your trust. But I'm asking for a chance to earn it." Sarah stepped forward, still holding Lily's hand, her presence a silent show of support. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, but others nodded slowly, understanding in their eyes. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused in the past," Mick continued. "I can't change what I did, but I can promise you this. The man standing before you now is not the same man who left this town in handcuffs. I'm just a father now, trying to give his daughter the life she deserves." The silence that followed felt different than before, less hostile, more contemplative. In the crowd, Tom Peterson, the man from the bar, was the first to nod in acknowledgement. Others followed, the tension in the square gradually easing. Karen stood at the edge of the festival crowd, watching her brother from a distance. The lights from the carnival rides cast a soft glow on his face as he helped Lily climb onto a carousel horse. She noticed how gentle his movements were, how his large hands carefully secured the safety belt around his daughter's waist. This wasn't the angry young man she remembered from years ago. Sarah stood nearby, her blonde hair catching the festival lights as she snapped photos of Lily on the carousel. Karen observed how Mick's expression softened when he looked at Sarah, how his usual stern facade melted away when she smiled at him. The carousel music filled the air with its cheerful melody as Karen remembered their last conversation. She'd been so hurt, so angry about the past. But watching him now, she saw something different. His speech earlier had touched something deep inside her. The raw honesty in his voice, the way he'd owned up to his mistakes. It wasn't what she'd expected. He's changed, hasn't he? Tom Peterson appeared beside her, following her gaze. Karen nodded slowly. I barely recognize him anymore. None of us did at first, Tom admitted, but he's been proving himself day by day. Fixed my truck last week, wouldn't take a dime for it. The carousel slowed to a stop, and Lily's delighted giggles carried across the fairground. Mick lifted her off the horse, and Karen saw the tenderness in his eyes as he set her down. She remembered that look. It was the same one their father had worn when they were children, before everything went wrong. Taking a deep breath, Karen started walking toward them. Her heart pounded with each step, years of hurt and anger mixing with a new feeling. Hope. Mick noticed her approaching and stiffened slightly, uncertainty crossing his face. Hey, Mick, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. Karen. He shifted his weight, looking down at his boots. Lily looked between them curiously, while Sarah gently took the little girl's hand, giving them space. I heard what you said earlier, Karen began, her eyes welling with tears, about choosing to be different every day. She paused, gathering her courage. I've been watching you tonight, with Lily and Sarah, with everyone. Mick remained silent, but his eyes met hers, vulnerable and hopeful. You really have changed, she continued, her voice breaking. The brother I see now, he's the one I always knew was in there somewhere. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm proud of you, Mick. Really proud. Mick's tough exterior crumbled at her words. His shoulders sagged, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from them. Karen, he started, his voice rough with emotion. I know, she said, stepping forward to wrap her arms around her brother for the first time in years. I know. They stood there, holding each other, as the festival continued around them. Years of pain and misunderstanding began to heal in that embrace, under the twinkling lights of the autumn fair. For Mick, it felt like coming home, really home, for the first time in forever. Sarah sat across from Tom at their usual meeting spot in the park, where they often handled custody arrangements for their children. The wooden bench creaked beneath them as a gentle autumn breeze rustled the golden leaves overhead. Tom looked different today, less rigid, more thoughtful. I saw you at the festival yesterday, Tom said, breaking their awkward silence. His fingers drummed nervously on his knee. With Mick and his daughter. Sarah tensed, prepared for another lecture about her choices, but Tom's next words surprised her. You looked happy, he said softly. Happier than I've seen you in a long time, maybe even happier than when we were together. Sarah studied his face, searching for any sign of sarcasm or judgment. Instead, she found only sincerity in his tired eyes. I was wrong about him, Tom continued, looking down at his hands. About Mick, I mean. When Julie first told me you were spending time with an ex-con, He shook his head. I jumped to conclusions. I was worried about the kids, but maybe I was just... Just what? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jealous, I guess. Tom's admission hung in the air between them. Seeing you move on, seeing you find happiness with someone else, it made me face some hard truths about myself. About us. Sarah felt her throat tighten. This was a conversation she never expected to have with Tom. I wasn't a good husband, Sarah. I was so focused on my career, on what I thought success should look like, that I forgot what really mattered. He looked up at the trees, blinking rapidly. And when things got hard, I ran. Left you to pick up all the pieces. Sarah's eyes welled with tears as memories of those difficult days flooded back. The lonely nights, the struggles to make ends meet, the brave face she put on for the kids. But watching Mick, Tom continued, seeing how he owns up to his past mistakes, how he's working every day to be better, it made me realize something. He might have a rougher past than me, but at least he's honest about it. He's trying to make things right. A squirrel darted across their path, momentarily drawing their attention. Sarah wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. The kids talk about him, you know, Tom said. They tell me how he fixes things around your house, how he helps them with their bikes. They say he makes you laugh. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm sorry, Sarah, for everything. And I want you to know that I support whatever makes you and the kids happy. He managed a small smile. Even if it's a tattooed ex-biker who's probably better at being there for our kids than I ever was? The words Sarah had longed to hear for so long washed over her like a healing balm. Years of carrying around guilt, doubt, and pain began to dissolve. She felt lighter, as if invisible chains had finally fallen away. Thank you, Tom, she whispered, meaning it more than she could express. That means a lot. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the shift in their relationship. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground at their feet. For the first time since their divorce, Sarah felt truly free. Free from the weight of failed expectations, free from the burden of what-ifs and if-onlys. She was free to move forward, to embrace the unexpected joy she'd found with Mick, without the shadow of her past holding her back. Julie Davis stood at the edge of the park's playground, her arms crossed, watching intently as Mick helped Lily climb the monkey bars. Her usual skepticism was giving way to something else, a grudging admiration she hadn't expected to feel. You can do it, sweetheart, Mick called out, his massive tattooed arms ready to catch Lily if she slipped. I'm right here. Lily's face scrunched up in determination as she reached for the next bar. I'm scared, Daddy. That's okay to be scared, Mick replied, his voice gentle. Being brave means doing something even when you're scared, and you're the bravest girl I know. Julie shifted her weight, remembering all the warnings she'd given Sarah about Mick. She'd been so certain she was protecting her friend, but now, watching this tender moment between father and daughter, doubt crept into her mind. Lily made it across the monkey bars, and Mick's face lit up with pride. That's my girl, he exclaimed, catching her as she dropped down. He spun her around, and Lily's delighted giggles filled the air. A group of mothers nearby, who had initially given Mick wary looks when he arrived at the playground, now smiled at the scene. Julie noticed how they'd slowly relaxed their protective stances, perhaps seeing what she was seeing, not an ex-con, but a devoted father. Lily ran off to the swings, and Mick settled onto a nearby bench, keeping a watchful eye on his daughter. Julie took a deep breath and walked over to him. Mind if I sit? She asked. Mick looked up, surprise flickering across his face. He nodded, moving over to make space. They sat in silence for a moment, watching Lily pump her legs on the swing, reaching higher and higher. Julie remembered all the times she'd warned Sarah about Mick's past, about the danger she thought he represented. "I was wrong about you," Julie said finally, her voice quiet but clear. Mick turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "I judged you without really knowing you," she continued. "I saw the tattoos, heard about your past, and I—" She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I thought I was protecting Sarah, but I was just being prejudiced." Mick's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Can't blame you for wanting to protect your friend," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "I've done things I'm not proud of, things that'll follow me forever." "But that's not who you are anymore," Julie said, watching as Lily waved at them from the swing. "I see that now. The way you are with Lily, how you've been there for Sarah." She turned to face him fully. "I'm sorry for doubting you, Mick." Mick nodded, accepting her apology with quiet dignity. "Thank you," he said simply. "That means a lot." They sat in companionable silence, the afternoon sun warming their faces. Around them, other parents chatted and children played, and for the first time, Mick seemed truly part of the scene, rather than an outsider looking in. A few of the mothers who had been watching earlier now waved to Mick as they gathered their children to leave. He waved back, and Julie could see the surprise and gratitude in his eyes at this small gesture of acceptance. "Daddy," Lily called out, "watch how high I can go." "I'm watching, sweetheart," Mick called back, a smile spreading across his face. "You're flying." Julie watched him watching his daughter, and she finally understood what Sarah had seen all along. A man who had faced his past and chosen to be better, not just for himself, but for the people he loved. The local newspaper sat on the diner's counter, its headline stark against the morning light. "Town council member resigns amid scandal." Sarah picked it up, her eyes scanning the article about Gerald Thompson, the man who had spent months trying to destroy Mick's reputation. "More coffee?" she asked Mick, who sat at his usual spot at the counter. Lily was at school, giving them a rare moment alone. "Thanks." He nodded, his eyes also drawn to the paper. The article detailed how Gerald had been caught embezzling funds from the town council, using the money to cover his gambling debts. His carefully constructed image of respectability had crumbled overnight. Through the diner's large windows, they could see Gerald walking down the street. His usually pristine suit was wrinkled, his shoulders hunched. People who once greeted him warmly now crossed to the other side of the street to avoid him. "Never thought I'd see him looking so defeated," Sarah said quietly, refilling Mick's cup. "He was always so proud." Mick wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "Pride can be dangerous," he said, his voice low. "Makes you think you're better than everyone else. Makes you forget we're all human." They watched as Gerald tried to enter the bank where he'd worked for 20 years. The security guard, looking uncomfortable, stopped him at the door. Even from across the street, they could see the red flush of shame on Gerald's face as he turned away. "He tried so hard to paint you as the villain," Sarah said, leaning against the counter. "All those rumors he spread about your past, trying to convince everyone you hadn't changed." "Maybe he needed someone to look down on," Mick replied, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Made him feel better about himself." Outside, Gerald stood on the sidewalk, looking lost. A few months ago, he'd been one of the most respected men in town. Now, people hurried past him without meeting his eyes, the same way they used to avoid Mick. "I remember how that feels," Mick said softly. "When people look right through you, like you're not even there." Sarah reached across the counter and squeezed his hand. "You never let it make you bitter, though. You just kept trying to be better." They watched as Gerald finally started walking again, his expensive shoes scuffing against the pavement. He passed by the diner. and for a moment his eyes met theirs through the window. There was recognition there, and something else. Perhaps the beginning of understanding. "I don't wish this on him," Mick said after Gerald had passed. "But maybe now he'll learn what it's like to need a second chance." Sarah nodded, wiping down the counter with a cloth. "Everyone makes mistakes. The real test is what you do after." Through the window, they could see Gerald's figure growing smaller as he walked away, alone with his thoughts and the consequences of his actions. The morning sun cast long shadows on the street, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, marking the hour. "Sometimes," Sarah said, "people have to lose everything before they can start over." Mick nodded, understanding in his eyes. They stood in comfortable silence, the quiet morning routine of the diner continuing around them. Neither of them took pleasure in Gerald's downfall, but they both recognized the irony of the situation. How the man who had tried so hard to prevent Mick's redemption now faced his own journey toward it. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the kitchen table as Mick packed sandwiches into a small cooler. Lily bounced around him, her excitement filling the room like sunshine. "What are we doing first, Daddy?" she asked, hugging her favorite stuffed bear to her chest. Mick smiled, zipping up the cooler. "Well, Princess, I thought we'd start with the park, then maybe get some ice cream, and after that—" He paused for dramatic effect. "The carnival's in town." Lily's eyes widened. "Really? The one with the Ferris wheel?" "That's the one." Mick watched as his daughter twirled around the kitchen, her joy infectious. It felt different now, planning outings like this. The weight of other people's judgment had lifted, making room for simple happiness. At the park, Lily ran ahead to the swings, her pigtails bouncing with each step. Mick followed, carrying their picnic supplies. He watched as she climbed onto the swing, remembering how she used to need his help. Now she pumped her legs confidently, soaring higher and higher. "Look how high I can go, Daddy!" she called out, her laughter carrying across the playground. "I see you, sweetheart. You're flying." He stood nearby, just in case, but knew she didn't need him hovering anymore. They spread their blanket under a big oak tree for lunch. Lily munched on her peanut butter and jelly sandwich, telling stories about school between bites. There was no mention of bullies now, no tears about mean comments, just excited chatter about her friends and her favorite subjects. "Mrs. Johnson says I'm the best reader in class," she announced proudly, wiping jelly from her chin. "That's my girl," Mick said, his chest swelling with pride. "Smart just like your—" He caught himself before mentioning her mother, but Lily didn't seem to notice. At the carnival, the afternoon sun warmed their shoulders as they walked hand in hand between colorful booths. The air smelled of cotton candy and popcorn. Lily pointed excitedly at everything, from the ring toss to the carousel. "Can we ride everything?" she asked, squeezing his hand. "Everything you want, Princess." They started with the merry-go-round, Lily perched on a golden horse while Mick stood beside her. Her face glowed with joy as they spun around, the carnival music playing cheerfully. Other parents smiled and waved, no longer pulling their children away when they saw him approach. At the ring toss, Mick won her a stuffed unicorn. Lily hugged it tight, declaring it would be best friends with her bear. They shared a huge cotton candy, their fingers sticky and blue, and rode the Ferris wheel 3 times. As the sun began to set, they headed home. Lily dozed in the car, clutching her new unicorn, her face peaceful and happy. Mick glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his heart full of love for this little girl who had changed his life completely. At home, he carried her upstairs to her bedroom, carefully changing her into pajamas without waking her fully. As he tucked her in, she stirred slightly. "Did you have fun today, sweetheart?" he whispered, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "The best day ever," she murmured sleepily. "Love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Princess." Mick knelt beside her bed, watching her drift back to sleep. "I'll always be here for you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Looking at his daughter's peaceful face, pride and love swelled in his chest, nearly overwhelming him. The evening breeze rustled through the leaves as Mick and Sarah walked along the quiet streets of their small town. Their shoulders brushed occasionally, and each time sent a warm flutter through Sarah's chest. The past few months had changed everything between them, transforming cautious friendship into something deeper. "Remember when we first met?" Sarah asked, her eyes twinkling in the fading sunlight. "I never thought I'd end up here, walking with you like this." Mick chuckled, a low rumble that made Sarah smile. "You mean when you stood up to that jerk in the diner? That was something else." He glanced at her, his expression soft. No one had ever defended Lily like that before. They paused at the town square, where fairy lights twinkled in the trees. Sarah's children were at their father's for the weekend, and Lily was having a sleepover at a friend's house, something that would have seemed impossible just months ago. "I'm proud of how far we've come," Sarah said, reaching for his hand. His larger one enveloped hers, rough calluses against her smooth skin. "The way the town's changed their minds about you, how Lily's doing so well in school now." Mick squeezed her hand gently. "Couldn't have done it without you, Sarah. You believed in me when nobody else did." His voice grew quiet. "Sometimes I still can't believe you're here." They found themselves walking towards the diner, their special place. Even closed for the evening, it held meaning for them both. Sarah used her key to let them in, flicking on just enough lights to see by. "It feels different at night," Mick observed, sliding into their usual booth. Sarah joined him, this time sitting beside him instead of across the table. "Everything feels different now," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Better." Mick wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "You know, I used to think I didn't deserve anything good in my life. Thought Lily was the only blessing I'd ever get." He turned to face her, his eyes serious. "But then you came along, showing kindness to a man everyone else had written off." Sarah reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You're not that man anymore, Mick. You never really were. You just lost your way for a while." Their relationship had grown slowly, carefully, built on a foundation of trust and understanding. Each small step forward had been deliberate, considering their children, their pasts, and their hopes for the future. "My kids adore you," Sarah said softly. "They've never seen me this happy." "Lily talks about you constantly," Mick replied with a smile. "Yesterday she asked if you could help her decorate her room. Said you have better taste than me." Sarah laughed, the sound echoing in the empty diner. "Well, she's not wrong about that." They moved to sit across from each other, their hands finding each other across the table. The familiar setting felt right, like coming home. This was where their story had begun, where they'd first seen past each other's surfaces to the truth beneath. "What do you think about the future?" Sarah asked, her thumb tracing circles on his palm. Mick's eyes softened as he looked at her. "I think about it a lot these days. Never used to, but now..." He squeezed her hand. "Now I can see something worth planning for." They sat together in the quiet diner, hands clasped across the table, sharing a moment of perfect peace and hope. The future stretched before them, full of possibility. The Sunday morning crowd filled the diner with cheerful chatter and the clink of coffee cups. Mick, Sarah, and Lily sat at their usual booth, but today felt different. The suspicious glances and whispered judgments that had once followed Mick were gone, replaced by friendly waves and warm smiles. Julie, Sarah's best friend, stopped by their table with a fresh pot of coffee. "More coffee, Mick?" she asked, already tilting the pot toward his cup. Her smile was genuine, a far cry from the wary looks she'd given him months ago. "Thanks, Julie," Mick said, returning her smile. He watched as she ruffled Lily's hair affectionately before moving on to the next table. Pastor Mike and his wife sat nearby, nodding hello as they enjoyed their after-church breakfast. Even Karen, Mick's sister, had joined the morning crowd, sitting at the counter with her own cup of coffee. The sight of her there, comfortable in his presence, still amazed him. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "Just taking it all in," he replied, his voice soft with wonder. "Never thought I'd see the day when you'd be the town's favorite mechanic?" Sarah finished for him, grinning. "Face it, Mick. People finally see what Lily and I have known all along." Lily looked up from her chocolate chip pancakes, her face serious. "That Daddy's the best?" she asked, maple syrup dripping from her fork. "That's right, sweetheart," Sarah said, wiping Lily's chin with a napkin. "The very best." Old Joe, who'd once crossed the street to avoid Mick, waved from his regular spot by the window. "Hey, Grizzly," he called out. "Don't forget about my truck tomorrow. She's making that funny noise again." "First thing in the morning, Joe," Mick promised, nodding at the elderly man. The bell above the door chimed as Tom, Sarah's ex-husband, walked in with their children. The kids rushed over to the booth, hugging their mother before sliding in next to Lily. Tom gave a friendly nod to Mick before heading to his own table. Sarah's children, Danny and Emma, immediately started chattering with Lily about their weekend plans. The three kids had grown close over the past months, forming their own little family unit. "Can we go to the park after breakfast?" Danny asked, looking hopefully between Mick and his mother. "Please?" Emma and Lily chimed in together. Mick exchanged a glance with Sarah, both of them hiding their amusement at the children's synchronized plea. "I suppose we could manage that," he said, trying to keep a straight face. The diner had fallen into a comfortable buzz of conversation and laughter. Martha, the elderly owner, stopped by their table with a plate of fresh-baked cookies. "On the house," she said with a wink, "for my favorite family." Lily's eyes lit up at the word family. She grabbed a cookie and looked around the table with a mischievous grin. "You know what?" she announced loudly, barely containing her giggles. "Mommy says you're my daddy now." The entire diner erupted in good-natured laughter. Sarah blushed, but her eyes met Mick's with unmistakable love. Mick felt his heart swell as he looked at Sarah, overwhelmed by the joy and acceptance that now filled his life. Danny and Emma joined in the laughter, while Lily sat there looking pleased with herself, chocolate chip cookie crumbs on her chin. Around them, the diner continued its Sunday morning routine. But for Mick, Sarah, and their children, this moment marked something special. The simple happiness of being together, accepted and loved. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.